Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari. Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Bhajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Bhajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parudikacharya Ashtotar Tadashi Srimad Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parudikacharya Ashtotar Tadashi Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai. Ananda Koti Vaishnavini Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai. Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga. Okay. Let's see, let's make sure I got the right place. Are we still in 13:8 to 12? Oh, good. I think we are. I think we did birth, old age, disease, and death.
I have page
41, bottom of the page, right? Yeah, that's correct. This is one little few lines of a paragraph. I think we stopped there. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. You don't want a book, Joseph?
No, I'm just going to
You're okay? Okay. Alrighty. On this 7th day of March, 2023 in San Diego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we are in Chapter 13, Nature, the Enjoyer, and Consciousness, page 541. And we're going to chant these verses again. And I'll tell you what, just so you get a different one, and each of you can chant. Is that okay?
Sorry, yes, we're in the middle of...
Oh, a purport. Yes, so we're going to finish the purport. Bottom. Yeah. But first let's do some chanting. And I'll chant all of them, and then we'll chant the first two, and then you can repeat in the second one. Okay, in Vyartesha. Amanitvam adambitvam ahimsa chantir arjavam acharyopasanam shaucham stayam atmavaningraha indriyateshu vairagyam anahankara evacha janma mityu jara vyadhi dukkha doshanu darshanam amanitvam adambitvam ahimsa chantir arjavam acharyopasanam shaucham stayam atmavaningraha indriyarteshu vairagyam anahankara evacha janma mrityu jara vyadhi dukkha doshanu darshanam. Dharma, you want to try? Text 9? Bottom of page 537. Indriyarteshu. Indriyarteshu vairagyam anahankara evacha janma mrityu jara vyadhi dukkha doshanu darshanam. Ras. At the bottom of the page, Indriyarteshu, text 9. Indriyarteshu vairagyam anahankara evacha janma mrityu jara vyadhi dukkha doshanu darshanam. Antonella. Indriyarteshu vairagyam anahankara evacha janma mrityu jara vyadhi dukkha doshanu darshanam. Indriyarteshu vairagyam anahankara evacha janma mrityu jara vyadhi dukkha doshanu darshanam. Okay, I'm just going to read the translation. Humility, pridelessness, nonviolence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease, Detachment, freedom from entanglement with children, wife, home, and the rest. Even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events. Constant and unalloyed devotion to me. Aspiring to live in a solitary place. Detachment from the general mass of people. Accepting the importance of self-realization. And philosophical search for the absolute truth. All these I declare to be knowledge, and besides this, whatever there may be, is ignorance. And we're skipping over to the bottom of page 541, and we'll definitely finish the purport tonight. As for detachment from children, wife, and home, it is not meant that one should not have no feeling for these. They are natural objects of affection. But when they are not favorable to spiritual progress, then one should not be attached to them. The best process for making the home pleasant is Krishna consciousness. If one is in full Krishna consciousness, he can make his home very happy, because this process of Krishna consciousness is very easy. One need only chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Accept the remnants of foodstuffs offered to Krishna. Have some discussion on the books like the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. And engage oneself in deity worship. These four things will make one happy. One should train the members of his family in this way. The family members can sit down morning and evening and chant together. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. If one can mold his family life in this way to develop Krishna consciousness, following these four principles, then there is no need to change from family life to renounced life. But if it is not congenial, not favorable for spiritual advancement, then family life should be abandoned. One must sacrifice everything to realize or serve Krishna, just as Arjuna did. Arjuna did not want to kill his family members, but when he understood that these family members were impediments to his Krishna realization, he accepted the instruction of Krishna and fought and killed them. In all cases, one should be detached from the happiness and distress of family life, because in this world, one can never be fully happy or fully miserable. Okay. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnanandana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmilitam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisances unto him and all members of Sri Parampara, the disciplic succession. So, this is sometimes a great mountain that one has to cross. Giving up attachment from children, wife, and home, which are usually the main sources of attachment in this world. And we can see how the Vedic culture is structured in such a way that there's certainly a place for that. Otherwise, we wouldn't all be here. I mean, we might be here, but there wouldn't be no Vedic culture at all, because there'd be no human beings being born. But there needs to be a way of engaging in family life so that it's not building or extending and deepening one's attachment to the material world, because that's just going to bring one back again for another round of birth, old age, disease, and death. So Prabhupada taught us from the early days that, yes, there's a certain way that family life can be structured in Varnashram. A young man gets married, a lady, and they make their home a temple. They understand the priority is Krishna consciousness. But there's also, the children are there, and how to have children. I'm not going to get into all the details, but the whole idea is that it's geared toward making the home into a fortress that's a defense against Maya, and that one can cultivate Krishna consciousness there very nicely. Srila Prabhupada was born into a family like that. His own family was like that. And we have so many figures from the Shastra that show that from the very childhood, where King Parikshit and so many other, where they're encouraged in Krishna consciousness. And we have a very nice example here with, what is it? My brain is going. Not Gora Madhava. What's his name? Gaura-Keshava. I'm sorry. Gaura-Keshava, Nangapriya, and Mukunda, and Vrinda. And they're just a great example. You can see, obviously they're very blissful children, and the parents are very strict. You ever see her chant japa? She's a serious japa chanter. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare. She's sitting over there chanting 16 rounds. And he's also, they're all very serious devotees. And his classes are great, you know, and I'm looking forward to, and I heard after Nityananda's appearance day that Brinda wanted to learn that Nityananda Ashtaka. I can maybe help her do that. So this is an ideal example, you know, and it's not, you know, they're not coming from Mars or anything. They're living by. I've been to their home. You know, it's a temple. So that's an important caveat here. But at a certain point, one has to keep the priorities straight, and then at a certain point, one has to give up family life, ideally, and then vanaprastha, so you're still with the wife, but there's no intimate relationship. You go to the places of pilgrimage. And ultimately, there's renunciation while you still have life in your body, and you can preach and you can cultivate the highest realization of Krishna consciousness. That's the ideal. So, but as Prabhupada says, when they are not favorable, it reminds me of this verse in the verses you probably heard me chant many times by Kapila Dev about the sadhu sangashtaka. 8 verses describing the necessity of associating with sadhus and what the result of that is. And so the question is, who is the sadhu? That's the first thing. If I'm going to associate, I have to find out who the sadhu is. So he has 3 or 4 verses describing that. The most famous is Tatikshava Karunika Suridak Sarvadehinam Ajata Shatavak Shanta Sadhavak Sadhabhushana. So these are the ornaments of a sadhu, character ornaments. First is tolerance. Tolerance and compassion. Now, to show compassion, sometimes you need a lot of tolerance. It's easy enough to be tolerant if you're sitting home or even if you're in an ideal situation alone, you're not challenging yourself. But compassion means you recognize that this world needs Krishna consciousness, and you're going to go out and you're going to try to spread Dharma. And there's so many challenges, so many difficulties that comes, and you can't get angry. You can't be furious because people don't take Krishna consciousness or challenge you. And we see the ideal. I mean, Srila Prabhupada was so tolerant in so many stages when he came to America, and even during the time when he was relying on somebody and they left Krishna consciousness. There's so many things. But he was always tolerant and compassionate, and the friend of all living beings, not just human beings. But the cows and all of these things, and really feeling empathy with every living soul, and that where possible they should be given some connection with Krishna, some prasadam. I remember we used to have a cat here. They gave him the name Narada Muni. I said, you can't get the cat Narada Muni, but I couldn't do anything about it. He was Narada Muni, and he was addicted to kheer. We would give him a little kheer every day, and our cats love milk anyway, So he would come every day for years. Little orange cat, maybe fallen sannyasi or something. And you were a kid at that time. I don't know if you never saw. He would come. I would put the little kheer on the leaf, put it down here. So so that's the idea that you see. Well, these are living entities. That it's trees and everything has a soul within, and that changes your perspective. It's not what is our purpose in life? What is our joy in life? Well, if we can be Krishna conscious, that's enough. We don't have to, lead an extravagant life and all kinds of, degrading sense gratification. And with that happiness, you can try to give as much as possible to others. That's the life of a devotee. To be Krishna conscious and give Krishna consciousness. So that's the nature of. So then he describes, well, how do you get these qualities? Tolerance, compassion, not having any enmity toward anyone, peacefulness. So obviously it's through Krishna consciousness. That's not in the first verse. Maya ananyena bhavena bhaktin kurvanti yedridham. Then he tells how you become a real sadhu. Ananya bhavena, unto me. Kapila Deva is an incarnation of Krishna's. So Mahi ananyena bhavena bhaktim kurvanta ye dudham, with great determination, practicing, undeviating devotional service to me. And then he says, Mahi ananyena bhaktim kurvanta ye dudham, matkrate chakta karmanas chakta swajana bandhava. For my sake, giving up any activity that's against Krishna consciousness. This is part of surrender. Accepting those things that are favorable, activities that are favorable and things that are favorable, and rejecting those that aren't. Even though we may be really attached to not doing something, like I always give the example of getting up, at 3:30 in the morning. That's often the hardest surrender when you first... But it's many things that are not, but you undertake them anyway because you're doing it for the goal. That's there in material life. Getting a college education, studying, taking the test instead of partying, that type of thing. So, but then the second part of the verse says, Matkrate chakta karma, for my sake, giving up any activity one may be attached to. And giving up one's friends and family if they're impediments to devotional service. That's there also. So that's what this is all about. But when they are not favorable to spiritual progress, then one should not be attached to them. The best process for making a home pleasant is Krishna consciousness, and he gives a little formula here. Chanting together, accepting foodstuffs, remnants, obviously. And you see these, I've been in so many Indian homes, they always have some kind of altar. Sometimes it's quite elaborate. You'll have the deities there. The deities can be set up in one's home, and you practice. It's not on the same standard as the temple, obviously. But it could be very strict. It's an impetus to cleaning up the room and the whole home, making it clean and everything pure. The deity is just the deity's home. If you get into that consciousness, that's what it's really about. So, Prabhupada says, engage one deity, read the Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam. These four things: chanting, discussing the books, accepting prasadam, worshipping the deity, train as members of the family. So this is all part of it. And then, so that was part of what that's about. And the rest of the paragraph was, Maichanya Bhaktim Asaktirana Puttradara Nityam Cha Samachitatvam. So being equipoised amongst pleasant and unpleasant things. This always comes up in the Bhagavad Gita. From the second canon, second chapter, we've heard of this. Is that right from the point where he says you have to tolerate, that verse, matra sparshasta konteya, shitoshna sugudukada, agamapayano nitjas tam tatikshasta bharata. So why is he giving him this verse about tolerance right up front? Because that's the problem that Arjuna is having. He can't tolerate the idea of the death of his beloved grandfather figure, Bhishma Dev, and his teacher, and all of his friends and relatives on the other side. He especially can't tolerate the idea that he's going to be largely responsible for it, because he's the main warrior on this side. So that's what's hanging him up, and he can't fight. He dropped his bow, sit down in this desperation on the chariot. But he surrendered unto Krishna as a guru, and then so he starts speaking. So right near the beginning, after he's telling him basically, you're speaking like a pundit, but you're not a pundit because you're lamenting for the body rather than understanding the importance of the soul. You're lamenting for what is not worthy of grief. So after another verse where he says, we're eternal, I've always existed, you've always existed, everyone here has always existed, exists now and will exist in the future. There's no death. There's only death of the body. It's changing clothes, so remember that, like it's changing a suit. And then the very next verse is the famous verse about transmigration. Anyone can, get a light bulb going on. You say, yes, dehi nosmin yata dehe. Just as in this one body, we've all been changing our body since we were kids, and we know we're going to keep changing, but we're always the same person, right? So what's the same while everything else changes? That's you. That's the Atma. That's the conscious self. So, and then the real thing, and that conscious self was never born and will never die. So you had previous births, you will have a future birth. But you can determine what kind of birth you're going to get by what you do in this body. That's the whole idea. But in that verse, he's saying that those who are dhira are not disturbed by this change because they know that the person is continuing to live. And he's talking about Arjuna. He's not talking about the soul and the body. I'm telling you, the first version of the unabridged Gita was wrongly edited because they took Prabhupada as a sober person and turned into self-realized. The self-realized soul is not disturbed by such a change. As the spirit soul, it changes from boyhood to youth to old age. The soul similarly enters another body at death. The self-realized soul is not disturbed by such a change. Now, if you read that, of course, the self-realized soul, you're talking about the soul, you're talking about that soul who's transmigrating, meaning that if you die and you're self-realized, you're not disturbed. That's true, but that's not what he's talking about. That Dhira is Arjuna, who's watching, who was killing, who's visualizing, I'll be completely freaked out when I have to kill my Bhishma Dev and the others. So he says, no, you have to be undisturbed. These things come and go. The cold and the heat and the pleasure and the pain, they come and they go. You have to tolerate them without being disturbed. And then he has a verse that our old friend Vijay, who's had a whole incredible career over almost 50 years of distributing Prabhupada's books, on the street, tolerating all kinds of things, people and situations. This verse, when he first read it, before he even joined Hare Krishna, this really impressed him. The next verse. Yam hi nabadiyante te purusham purushar shabha samadukha sukham dhiram so amritat vaya kalpate. That if one can be dhira, can be sober-minded and undisturbed in the dualities of pleasure and pain, heat and cold, honor and dishonor, and all these different things, then only is one eligible for liberation. In other words, one has to come to that point of having one's Krishna conscious gyroscope, if you will, like they have in a ship, right? It keeps it so that when very wonderful, happy things happen for the body and the mind, you don't lose your equilibrium. That's one way of losing it. And then the other way is when dangerous things happen or difficulties come, you're not thrown for a loop. Because these are just the vicissitudes of the material energy. They're not really affecting me as the soul. And you're determined to remember Krishna in all of these situations and stay on that platform. So then you can be, that's not sufficient, but it's necessary for liberation. You understand the difference? So this is, what is next? We read next. Did we read the next one? Happiness and distress? Yeah. There are concomitant factors of material life. No, actually in the previous chapter he deals with the same thing. Family life in such a way, but if it is not congenial, not favorable, one must sacrifice everything to realize or serve Krishna, just as Arjuna did. Arjuna did not want to kill family members, but when he understood that these family members were impediments to his Krishna realization, he accepted the instruction of Krishna and fought and killed them. In all cases, one should be detached from the happiness and distress of family life, because in this world one can never be fully happy or fully miserable. Okay, so that's, what did we read there? That's the asaktiran vishram putradara nityam chat samachitta. Samachittavam, sama is the same word, same, equipoise with consciousness in ishta and anishta, and the nice things and the unhappy things. Now all of this becomes possible because of what the next verse. Mai chananya yogena bhaktida vibicharini. With undeviating devotion unto me, then all these qualities become possible. Otherwise, if you're on the material plane, then you're going to be disturbed and you're going to be attracted. So they go hand in hand. Striving for the equilibrium will help you practice Krishna consciousness, and tolerance will help you practice, and then you'll get to the point where you're more naturally tolerant and you're more naturally attracted to Krishna and detached from children, wife, home, and the rest. Okay, so where are we? Happiness and distress are concomitant factors of material life. One should learn to tolerate, as advised in the Bhagavad Gita. One can never restrict the coming and going of happiness and distress, so one should be detached from the materialistic way of life and be automatically equipoised in both cases. Generally, when we get something desirable, we are very happy, and when we get something undesirable, we are distressed. But if we are actually in the spiritual position, these things will not agitate us. To reach that stage, we have to practice unbreakable devotional service. Devotional service to Krishna without deviation means engaging oneself in the 9 processes of devotional service. Chanting, hearing about Krishna, worshipping, offering respect, etc., as described in the last verse of the 9th chapter. That process should be followed. Okay, so we more or less dealt with most of that. Naturally, so this is, now he's moving on to the final verses here. Yeah, I think he's on the last one now. Naturally, when one is adapted to spiritual way of life, he will not want to mix with materialistic men. That would go against the grain. That's, okay. Aspiring to live in a solitary place. Yeah, vivikta desha sevatvam, like that. That would go against his grain. One may test himself by seeing how far he is inclined to live in a solitary place without unwanted association. Naturally, a devotee has no taste for unnecessary sporting or cinema going or enjoying some social function because he understands that these are simply a waste of time. There are many research scholars and philosophers who study sex life or some other subject, but according to the Bhagavad Gita, such research work and philosophical speculation have no value. That is more or less nonsensical. According to the Bhagavad Gita, one should make research by philosophical discretion into the nature of the soul. One should make research to understand the self. That is recommended here. Now this brings to mind a verse from this favorite section of mine, which I've been kind of emphasizing lately, in the 2nd chapter of the 1st canto of Bhagavatam, beginning with that's text number 6. It's all about Dharma. Dharma, the original Dharma. Dharma Raj, over there. And one of the verses describes that one has to practice devotional service. It says, Tasmad ekena manasa bhagavan satpatam pati shotavya kijitabhyascha dhyayak pujas nityada. So this is one of the many verses. The Tatsmat, when you get the Tatsmat verse, it's nice to study it because it's the end of an argument. Tatsmat means therefore. So he's saying, therefore, if one wants to be successful in one's social life, you may be part of an ashram, everyone has some place there, but the success of it will be if the ashram is focused on devotional service, pleasing Krishna, right? Samsiddhi haritoshanam is perfected. So, therefore, one has to practice as follows. With one pointed attention, ekena manasa, Bhagavan Satpatam, to Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the master of the devotees. Hear about him, Shotavyak, chant about him, Kirtadischa, Dhyayak, meditate and think about him, Pujas, and worship him, Nityada, constantly. So in order to do that, one has to have a taste for hearing about Krishna. Or let's put it this way, if you do that, then you'll be sharpening the sword of remembrance. The more you can remember Krishna, the more you can absorb the mind in Krishna, the more that the attachments in your heart for this world, which is what's keeping us here, will be cut asunder. And that attachment will all be transferred to Krishna and Krishna's devotees' service to Krishna. That's the whole idea. That's the natural state. We're in an unnatural state all these millions of births. Being attached and absorbed in our particular body and pleasurable things and being, freaked out by the painful things. That's not the position of the soul. That's unnatural, perverted reflection. So he says, therefore one should do this. But to do that, one has to be attracted to hear about Krishna. It all begins with hearing about Krishna. Like in this age, it all begins with reading about Krishna, or at least getting on the sites and the internet that's all a kirtan and you can read it. Whatever it is, whatever's input that you're getting has to be Krishna content. And Prabhupada caused a revolution, so there's unlimited Krishna content you can ingest, as it will, not mentally. But you have to have a taste for it. If you don't, then you'll avoid it. Well, there's no sense gratification here. Let me go on some other site or whatever. So how does one get that taste? To hear. Shushusho Sharadhanasa Vasudeva Kataruchi Syan Mahatsavya Vipra Punya Tirthana Shevana. By hearing and serving, Shushusho is an interesting word. It means ardent hearing, submissive all reception, or it just means sincere service too, because those go together. So serving the pure devotee, the tears, Shradhan with faith, Shradhan. Vasudeva Katha Ruchi, the Ruchi, the taste for Vasudeva Katha, Krishna Katha, hearing about Krishna, is engendered by this practice. Syan comes into being, Mahat Sevaya, by rendering services to Mahatma, to the great souls. Punya Tirtha Nishevanan, who are very tirthas, like bridges over the illusory world into the spiritual world. So now, with that taste for hearing, then one absorbs himself in chanting and hearing the holy name and all these other sources of transcendental sound we have. And Krishna within the heart, he sees you're hearing about him, and then he purifies. Vidunoti, abhadra vidunoti, means he cleanses away the unwanted things. Just like Cheto Darpana Bharjanam. Just like the first very words of the Shikshastika. Our main practice is this congregational chanting of the holy name. That's the essence of hearing and chanting, is kirtan. You're hearing the leader, and then you're chanting, the leader's hearing you, back and forth, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. It's absolute. It's perfect. It's complete in of itself. Purnak Shuddho. There's a wonderful verse about the holy name. Nama Chintamani Krishnas. Chaitanya Rasa Vigraha. Purnak Shuddho Nitya Mukto Abhinatva Nama Namino. So the holy name of Krishna is like a Chintamani gem. How so? The Chintamani transform that which it contacts, isn't it? Turns it into gold. So our minds, our consciousness are purified, turned back into our original spiritual nature by contact with the holy name of Krishna. So that's the Chintamani, Nama Chintamani Krishna. Chaitanya Rasa Vigraha, the very form, the personification of our relationship with Krishna. Meaning that by just contacting that name with great attention and devotion, we'll be awakened to our original swarup. In other words, it's a complete process. And that was proved by such great devotees as Haridas Thakur. And who all he did was chant. That was his whole thing. It's a lot, 192 rounds. Think about it. Let me do 16. What is it? 32 times 16? No. What's 16 is 192? Come on, Ross, you're a college graduate. 132, 12. 12 times as much he's chanting. 10 hours? No, more like 16. Well, I once had this fantasy. Well, how can I get up to 64 rounds? You know. Well, first thing you have to get down to 5 minutes a round. Otherwise, you can't do much else during the day. But 5 minutes a round is like 3 seconds a mantra. Have you tried it? Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare. You're not hearing much. Somehow he was chanting 5 minutes a round, and so yeah. But then then also to attend the whole morning program, it's like 5 hours at 5 minutes a round, and 5 minutes a round is ridiculously fast. So that's 5 hours of chanting. How am I going to squeeze that into the 4 hours that we have the morning program? But in any case, we have to refine our chanting and perfect it. And the idea is, once you get that taste, what's so wonderful about it, you can't overeat on hearing and chanting. You can they never get satiated. You never get satiated. There's so many verses like that. Pabandhihe bhagavata atmanak satam katam matam shavanaputeshu sambritam punanti te vishayavadushatashyam vajanti tachadhanasuro rohantikam. One of the beautiful verses of Bhagavad Gita. Is it chapter 2 of the second canto, the last verse? Yeah. So what it means here is that those who drink through the ears, fully satisfied, what are they drinking? Katamritam, the nectar of Krishna Katha. Bhagavata, about Bhagavan. Atmanaksatam, every syllable is so important. Atmanaksatam means for whom is the very self of the devotees, who are so attached to the Lord. Atmanaksatam. Katamritam, Shravanaputeja, how are they drinking through the ear holes? Literally Shravanaputeja. Then what's the result? Punantite, they purify. Vishayavadushatashayam. Vishayavadushatashayam means the polluted aim of life Ashya means what you long for, known as sense gratification. It's purified. That ardent desire is turned to Krishna. And you can see the madness, that Krishna's devotees have for serving him, exemplified by the gopis. When they were separated from him, they were mad. They just imitated his pastimes. They thought they were Krishna. They were so much attached in the rasa dance. So that's the highest level. But all of that passion, all of that madness for sense gratification, and not just the gross things, but honor, and fame and all of these, fame and honor and these things and respect, is turned toward Krishna. Meaning that I don't want any of that. Amanina, manadena. I don't care. As long as I can somehow, serve Krishna's lotus feet, or serve the devotees of the devotees of the devotees. This verse in the Mukunda Mala Stotra is Mad janmanak palamidam madukaita bari Mad pratani madanugra esha eva Tvad britya padicharika britya britya iti imam smadalokanata. Lord Chaitanya talks about dasa anudasa. He has a verse, but he says, my dear Lord, please show me this mercy and make my life successful. How? By considering me the servant of 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 your servant. In other words, very humble position. I don't expect to have an intimate service for you, but if I could just serve those who are serving your devotee, that's how the great devotees feel. And they really feel, that they're not qualified. And so they need the mercy the most, like that type of thing. It's a reversal of the usual egotistical battle that we have in the material world. So, how did I get onto that? 1 to 11. Prabhupada refers to one verse in that section. You see that it's coming up. All right, any discussion so far? Questions about this? This is all an answer to Arjun's question, what is knowledge? And at the end of this whole series of verses, what does he say? All this whole list we've been going on for 3 days, all these elements I declare to be knowledge, and besides this, whatever there may be is ignorance. So we should know what it is. Try to live it. Amanitvam, adambitvam, be free of pride. Adambitvam, I pointed out, is, Prabhupada says pride is damba. But it has to do with pretension also. Pretension. In other words, that you're pretending. The classic thing is you pretend to be religious. I always think of Life magazine back in the 1960s, I think it was. They had some special on the mafia in the New York area, and they had pictures of guys, And you read about their life, and they're mostly Catholics, they're Italy or Irishmen, whatever it is, this Jewish mafia and everything. But and they go to church, they go into church. They want to be seen as religious because that adds to their prestige, whatever. But they're not. They're just the opposite of religious. So that's dambha. That's false pride. Amanatvam, adambit, ahimsa, chantirarjavam, and non-violence to all living beings. Arjavam, the simple life. This whole list, which has as its keystone, as the central jewel, uninterrupted and unmotivated devotion unto me. Is the second to last verse, my chananya yogena. Ananya yoga means without deviation. Unto me, bhakti avyabhicharani means constant. That everything depends on that. So if we can cultivate that, and at the same time be conscious of these qualities and try to follow them, we'll get the strength from Krishna to follow those qualities and manifest them. And all of them have as the purpose to purify the heart so that we finally come closer to Krishna and we can be very steady in our devotional service and spread it's the only thing of value in this world, Krishna consciousness. So I don't think we finished this. If no one has a question or comment, let's finish the purport. All right. How far did we get? Second paragraph, as far as self-realization. As far as self-realization is concerned, it is clearly stated here that bhakti yoga is especially practical. As soon as there is a question of devotion, one must consider the relationship between the supersoul and the individual soul. The individual soul and the supersoul cannot be one, at least not in the bhakti conception, the devotional conception of life. This service of the individual soul to the Supreme Soul is eternal, nityam, as it is clearly stated. So bhakti, or devotional service, is eternal. One should be established in that philosophical conviction. In the Srimad Bhagavatam 1-11, this is explained. Okay, this is the different levels of understanding the absolute truth. Vadanti tat tat babadas tattvamya jnanam advayam. Those who are actually knowers of the absolute truth know that the self is realized in three different phases, as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. Close quote. Bhagavan is the last word in the realization of the absolute truth. Therefore, one should reach up to that platform of understanding the Supreme Personality of Godhead and thus engage in the devotional service of the Lord. That is the perfection of knowledge. So then he has a summary paragraph. Beginning from practicing humility up to the point of realization of the Supreme Truth, the Absolute Personality of Godhead. This process is just like a staircase beginning from the ground floor and going up to the top floor. Now, on this staircase, there are so many people who have reached the first floor, the second, or the third floor, etc. But unless one reaches the top floor, which is the understanding of Krishna, he is at a lower stage of knowledge. If anyone wants to compete with God and at the same time make advancement in spiritual knowledge, he will be frustrated. It is clearly stated that without humility, understanding is not truly possible. To think oneself God is most puffed up. Although the living entity is always being kicked by the stringent laws of material nature, he still thinks, I am God, because of ignorance. The beginning of knowledge, therefore, is amanitva, humility. One should be humble and know that he is subordinate to the Supreme Lord. Due to rebellion against the Supreme Lord, one becomes subordinate to material nature. One must know and be convinced of this truth. So, and then we're going to read about what the goal of it all is. Okay, suppose I'm trying really hard to fulfill these 20 or so elements of knowledge. What's the purpose? That's the gayam. Remember, jnanam and then gayam. What do I need now? Just like when I go to school, go to college, get a degree. You know, well, why? So I'll get a good job. So, you know, I won't be a derelict on the street or whatever. There's a whole purpose to the education. But unfortunately, materialistic education just leads you down a blind alley and you still get your still conditioned soul. So we have the logical end of education. Join the Hare Krishnas. Yes, it's a degree. You have a degree, right? Yeah, a few degrees. So the really intelligent, and you have 2 degrees. I dropped out after 3 months, that was it. Anyway, anyone who comes in touch with Krishna consciousness and practices is, you can really, I mean, I had so many teachers. Ironically, one of the teachers, my second attempt at going to college, I wanted to study philosophy, you know, because I was interested in ethics, what was the source of the, you know. So I took a philosophy course, and I was studying Western philosophy, starting with Plato, Socrates, going on up like that, you know. And who was teaching me? An Indian gentleman who had come from India, and we got into Western philosophy. But you know, it's interesting that Prabhupada also studied Western philosophers. There's a book that we put out called Beyond Illusion and Doubt. And Prabhupada, during his travels around the world, he would sometimes often travel with Sharma Sundar, or Harayagriva would be with them. And they had studied these guys, so they presented these philosophers to Prabhupada. They would condense, you know, the books and ask him questions and present the philosophy, and Prabhupada would respond, and that was all recorded. And he wanted that book, you know, that was called the philosophy book, and he wanted that produced. It wasn't produced during his time. And after he left, we took all the transcripts, and Rabindra Swarup, who had a degree in philosophy, he went down to Miami, and that's where the press was located at that time. And we eventually put the Bhagavatam out there. And he looked at the transcripts, and he said, faulty questions, perfect answers. There's a book called Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers with Brahmatirtha. So the problem was that they weren't presenting the full philosophy of these guys. How could they? It would take, they were presenting those parts of it that they felt Prabhupada could respond to, So they felt, their idea was, well, this isn't really going to be acceptable in academia because anyone who knows the philosophy, well, this is not, So anyway, the thing kind of ran aground. And then after some time, I had been working at BTG, and we were putting out selective ones. Like we did one on Marx. Prabhupada had a conversation on Marx. And we had a two-part series. And it's interesting because Prabhupada, the conversation would take place in 1974, 75. Nobody, including the American CIA, foresaw the demise of the Soviet Union. That was a big shock practically up to the day that it happened, that the whole thing fell apart, But Prabhupada did. He spent 3 or 4 days in Moscow, and he saw the people. They said they're unhappy. They're lining, they would line up, and to try to get ordinary groceries and things. And, you mark my words, there'll be another revolution, he said. And sure enough, in 1991, the whole thing collapsed. It was like, oh, we won the Cold War, it's crazy. Anyway, so we took the ones, there's a book. We took most of the ones, some of them were very obscure philosophers. We didn't bother with it. Because this is going to be a mass distribution book. And we put it out, and it's called the Beyond Illusion and Doubt. And so, but it was fascinating. Prabhupada knew something about these, and he would respond to the questions. So there's always something missing with this Western philosophy. They don't have access to this absolute knowledge, and so they're working off of their take on the material world as it exists, and other philosophers and everything. They put something together. But like the whole thing with Marxism and Leninism and socialism, it can't make you ultimately happy. Because there's always a set of people who, are kshatriyas, who are leaders and stuff, and without religion, without a strong central sense of who is God and service to God, then inevitably the guys at the top get corrupted, and they try to cash in, just like you have in Russia now. The whole thing is completely corrupt. Putin is one of the wealthiest men in the world, billions and billions. He stole, Why not, So it's and all the other philosophies have some problem. Prabhupada likes Socrates. He likes Socrates because Socrates is famous for he's corrupting the youth by teaching them that there's life after death or whatever. So they arrested him, and they said, we're going to execute you. So he laughed. He said, first try to catch me. Because he knew he wasn't the body. That was the thing. So he took the hemlock with equanimity, and so and because there's some, philosophy from India coming in there in Greece. There's relevant. You can see it, Now we go around the mulberry bush, Tulsi. Yeah, it's a species of basil. It's the same related, believe it or not. Sariputta collected a whole bunch of things that showed how the elements of the Vedic culture had come in the West. Okay, we need to adjourn, and we'll convene again tomorrow on text 13. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hari Hari Bol.